Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Tiana Lyons King, and I am CAM's Community Engagement Manager. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm zooming in from San Diego, which is the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay people. Before we begin, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping for everyone, and then we'll get into our session today. So this workshop is being recorded and will be posted to CAM's YouTube. You will all receive a link via email once it is uploaded. Our workshops are a space for learning and collaboration. We ask that you respect yourself and others while you're here in the space with us today. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of our presentation today, and the chat box will be open throughout the session for your convenience. We ask that you just refrain from messaging Ariel directly and use the chat box as a general meeting chat instead. And then, of course, we'll answer any questions at the tail end of our presentation today. With that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Ariel. The floor is yours. I'm here if anyone needs me. I'll just be muted in that case.
Great. Thanks, Tiana. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Weintraub. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Institutional Giving Associate Director at the Oakland Museum of California. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. I come from the Oakland Museum of California. I live in Oakland, California, and I've been at this as the grant writer, and I have about 4 years of teaching essay composition experience before that. So I'm a professional writer. This is how I identify primarily. And so this workshop comes from that perspective of both a professional writer and a person who's super interested in writing words and how language translates what we want to say in our thoughts to other people through language. This session came about because I'm interested in this topic. Language equity is a really interesting topic to me, but it's also an important topic to me because I know the power. And so I would love to learn about this. And so I put this together as a learner. I'm really coming at it from a perspective that we all have more to learn about how to use language in an equitable way and how to encourage our funders also to use language in this way. I do want to acknowledge that I have a colleague, Liz Wesky, who's coming onto the call at some point, and she has also been really instrumental in helping me craft this webinar. One other thing I'm going to say before we get into it is if anyone who is on the webinar live right now and actually doing the writing exercises with us, if you'd be willing to have your camera on, I would so appreciate it. It's very helpful for me as a person who is room by myself doing this to see what community we're building together. And so if you're like at your kitchen table and you're really eating breakfast, please refrain. But if you are willing to be with us in community as you write, I would love it. Anytime you feel like you can turn on your video, I'd love to see your face. Okay, let's go on and start this, start with a session overview. So I just want to make sure you all know, this is a writing session. So we are going to be writing. We have 4 writing prompts today. We're going to first have a moment of calm and grounding. Then we're going to have I'm going to talk a lot about the concepts of language equity that I've been learning and want to share with you. We're going to write as we go. I have a couple of writing tips and some recommendations. You've all received the resource page. We're just going to go through that really quickly at the end. And then there will be a generous amount of time for questions at the end. I want to make sure also everybody understands that I cannot claim to be an authority on anti-DEI language that the federal government has decided they don't want to see in any grant applications. The motivations, the racism, the anti-immigrant actions, the Doge rulings, the lawsuits, those are not the center of this session, although they are related to this session. But what we're really doing is exploring a variety of phrases that encourage choice, agency, and respect for all audiences. We're just going to move through these, but obviously, if we want to talk about that stuff at the end, we certainly can. Okay, let's go into our first exercise. I'm just going to lead us through a 3-minute guided meditation. And I'm going to have a timer on over here, so I'm going to time us. And the way to start this is to get yourself in a comfortable position. If you feel like turning off your camera for this part, I completely understand. I'm just going to look down while I do this. And what I'm doing is I'm going to concentrate on pulling my attention inward. And I'm going to feel my feet on the floor. And I'm going to feel what it feels like to have my seat in this chair with my back supported. And I'm going to feel my shoulders, see if I can relax them a little bit. And then I'm going to put my attention on my breath, noticing that my breath just happens. There's an inhale, and then there's usually a pause and an exhale. And the purpose here is I'm just trying to quiet my mind. Noticing my inhale and my exhale, getting grounded in this present moment. Noticing that I'm safe, I'm in this room. I'm going to be here for the next hour. This is the present moment. I can calm my thoughts. When other thoughts come in, I can set them aside and refocus my inhale and my exhale. When I get distracted, of course, that's not a problem. I simply want to pull my mind back here to the present moment, to what I'm doing right now. Sitting, meditating, breathing. And that's the bell that tells us that we just had 3 minutes of meditation. Thanks everyone for doing that. Calming our bodies and our brains is a really great way for us to start any project. So we're going to move on now. Oh, by the way, that image is called The Road West, 1938, a Dorothea Lange image that we have in our collection. So here's an image of the Oakland Museum. This is where I work. This is where I'm sitting right now. And we're going to start out by really acknowledging the mission of our organization. So my recommendation to you is to write down your mission. The OMCA mission is to inspire understanding and empathy with stories and experiences of California's art, history, and natural environment to build more equitable and connected communities. So this mission, sorry if it got cut off there in the slide, this mission is where I'm coming from, right? So I'm actually coming from an institution that puts the words understanding, empathy, equitable in our mission. And we realize that not every museum has that opportunity. We're in a particular situation where we are somewhat protected from any kind of punishing actions by our donors for having these ideas about equity. Our board is committed to anti-racism. Our strategic plan articulates specific diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes. And we're known for this. We've actually been doing this kind of work. And this has been kind of a part of our mission since we were founded in 1969. So that's where I'm coming from. But regardless of where your mission might stand with equitable language, we can all still use equitable language in our proposals and reports to funders. It doesn't mean you can't use them if it doesn't appear in your mission. But we're going to do our first writing exercise, and we're going to have our mission statement at the top. And if you need to go and look it up, go ahead, please. It's important to actually have it written down. And then write about, for the next 3 minutes, what's the relationship between your mission statement and your community, right? Or maybe it's your mission statement and equity or equality. Or maybe there's something in your mission statement about systemic oppression or respect for all people. So let's just spend the next 3 minutes writing about how your mission relates to community. Oh, let's go back, Tiana, we're not quite there yet. We're still on writing your mission statement and what's the relationship between your mission statement and community. Go ahead and finish the phrase you're writing at the moment. And come on back to where we are. I'm gonna go on to the next slide. So the next slide is really, this is a Barry McGee image from called Untitled, 2010. This is in our Gallery of California Art. And what I'm trying to encourage us to think about is, we just wrote a little bit about how our community is reflected in the mission of our organization for our visitors, right? But now I really want to do some reflection for ourselves. How are our communities, our personal communities, or identities reflected in our museum's mission? Do you see yourself in your mission? And what's your relationship to equity and maybe even your personal commitment to equity and inclusion? Have you ever felt excluded? You know, is there a community or identity that might feel excluded by your mission? And how do you show up at work? Do you bring all of your identities there? So let's just do a little bit of self-reflection in the next writing exercise. This is a free writing exercise, right? You don't have to write in sentences. You can make a list. You can do a rant, anything that you want in this writing exercise, just for you. So I'm gonna ask Tiana to put this prompt into the chat so that we can really let ourselves explore these ideas. So go ahead and finish the idea that you're writing at the moment. You can go back to that if you would like later. We're going to move forward and I'm going to start really trying to define language equity. And again, this is what I have found, right? These are the concepts that I have found as I've been looking around, trying to read up on different ways to describe language equity. It turns out it's a concept that's not just in our field, right? It's not just the museum field, it's in most nonprofit fields, and some health fields are using language equity work. And the ways that I've been able to approach it are these two different ways. The first is through asset framing. So asset framing is a narrative model, defines people by their assets and aspirations before noting their challenges and deficits. They invest in people for their continued benefit to society. How do we create equitable outcomes for all members of our community? We can start by defining people by their aspirations, not their challenges. So it's a pretty interesting idea. It's been around for a while. A guy named Fabian Shorters has really kind of copyrighted the idea, but it's really been out there for a bit. And quite a few organizations are trying to use asset framing. Some of our funders have gotten interested in this idea as well. So this is pretty recognizable out there in the nonprofit world, but I actually haven't seen a lot of it in the museum field. I've seen some, so some of us are taking it up. And I would encourage you to consider how you could see it a little bit more in your own museum, even in our exhibits, in our labels. So that's one element, and I'm going to go into a little bit more. And the other is people first language. So people first language is by this group called Some of Us, but also, a concept that's been out there for a while, and it aims to make personhood the essential characteristic of every person, and that other descriptive social identities that people may hold as secondary or non-essential, right? So this is really interesting. This is us as people. It's very humanitarian. It's very much about us as people first, and then any sort of characteristics that we might hold as secondary or non-essential. So I'm going to go into both of these, and the resources on the resource page really go into these a lot more. Next slide. So with asset framing, I'm just going to give a little example. For example, we often have to find funding for our educational programs. I think almost every museum has to find funding for educational programs. And oftentimes we're asked to describe how underserved they are, how marginalized they are, how economically disadvantaged or disenfranchised they are, in order to even get the funding. And what we're talking about with asset framing is how can we describe the students and the learners in a more positive way, but still have a way to show the funder that we are serving students they want to access with their funding. So the descriptors that I've added here, we can tell them about what grades they come from, kind of what kind of learners they are. We can tell them what curriculum they're working on right now. The Gold Rush curriculum is what we often help our learners learn. They come from multilingual families. They might come from an urban setting or a rural setting. So we can describe them in different ways, and we can use their schools or school districts or cities or counties to show their economic and demographic statistics. So on the next slide is an example. And I'm hoping you can read this. But I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically this is an example of a grant. And I'm going to leave this slide up for a while while we write. And so what I'm going to put into a grant report is how many students we served. Of course, that's pretty much an easy statistic for us to get. And then Also, I'm gonna include, because I know which schools they're coming from, what percentage of attendees are coming from schools from Oakland, what percentage of attendees are coming from Title I schools that serve low-income families, because that's a way the Title I schools describe themselves. So I'm going to use the language that the Title I school uses to describe itself. I'm going to talk about what we offer to these schools. I'm going to talk about the Oakland Unified School District that we serve and how they describe their student population, which is through, some demographics that we have through the census. I'm going to describe Alameda County. I'm going to describe Oakland. So I'm going to try to tell them about who we served, by using the data that I have from their schools and their counties. And then I'm also going to say how we like to describe our students. So in the OMCA educational framework, we see students as what we call change makers. So we have a whole change maker framework for our students and for our school programming. And then I'm also going to show that we receive positive feedback from our adult chaperones and our teachers. And I'm going to probably go into a few examples of those. So this is going to be a 3-minute writing exercise for you to think about how you could describe your museum's audience using a positive perspective, trying to use asset framing. You can think about what data you can use to find out more about your audience and put that in as a placeholder. If you don't know it right now, you can think, oh, I probably could find out these things about our audience, but also describe them in multiple other terms, positive terms, ways that you can think about who they are and what they are really aspiring to in their lives. So I'm going to give us 3 minutes for this exercise.
Ariel, would you mind just reminding folks of what we're doing in this 3 minutes?
Sure.
Mm.
We're writing about our museum's audience from a positive perspective. So go ahead and wrap up what you have been rating. I think that's a good reminder, Tiana, maybe for the webinar online, we will just make sure the prompts are added. Yeah. And you can, again, you're gonna go back to this. This is just a way to try it out. Okay, I'm gonna move on. We're gonna go on to the next concept, which is people first language. But really what people first language does is it examines bias. And whether we know it or not, we may hold bias and we may have it in our language. So I'm just gonna read the definition of bias: prejudice or preference toward a group over another group. Implicit or unconscious bias are associations we hold about groups of people without realizing it affects our attitudes and actions. Explicit or conscious bias are biases we know we have and we may use purposefully. So the recommendations that come from people first language are pretty simple, but they're pretty simple to understand, but hard to put into action truthfully. One is to replace harmful terms that have oppressive histories or connotations with more neutral language that conveys the same message. An example here is to replace the poor, a phrase that's called the poor, with people experiencing material poverty. So we're putting the people first and their experience later. We're not defining them by their experience. The second recommendation is to actually listen to how people describe themselves. For example, a person with low vision may or may not describe themselves as blind. So you want to be able to ask them how they describe themselves. And then if you're unable to ask, you describe as much as you know about them without making any assumptions. So the next slide. This is an image of, again, our Gallery of California art and a visitor who's standing at a prompt that says, what does it mean to be your true self? So what I'd like to suggest we do for the next 3 minutes is you describe yourself using people first language. Use your preferred pronoun as if you were describing yourself in the third person. So for me, that would be, she is a professional working in the museum field who identifies as Jewish and bisexual and Californian. And you can build on that. And, the ideas are you could include your gender, your sexual orientation, your racial identity, your age descriptor, your class background, your position in any hierarchy or any other identity marker that you use, describing yourself from the third person. go ahead and finish the statement that you're on at the moment. That was our last writing exercise, so if you want to take a minute and just finish any other statements, I'm going to give you a minute to go ahead and look back at your writing, see if there's anything that you weren't able to get down, just to make sure that when you go back to it, you'll have an idea of what you were trying to say. Okay, so now let's move to the next slide. I'm going to give you a little writing tip. It's about using active voice. So the active voice is a term that writers use. And if you are ever in a writing class or ever had to, do essay composition in college, if you, they kind of introduced this in high school, not a whole lot, but most people have had some interaction with how to use the active voice, and almost everyone I know struggles with it. It is not how we naturally speak, although as you use it more, you probably do more of it. And it's also not entirely how we're trained to write. When we're trained to write, oftentimes we're trained to write in a passive voice that sounds much more academic. And so we're trying to change that in the writing field. But what I want to just suggest is that you, if you're interested in language equity and want to take a little bit of time, you actually learn how to use the active voice in your own writing. In the people's first language idea, the active voice is useful because it puts the actor, the sentence, the person or the object in the center of the sentence, and they have the role of performing the action. It conveys strength and agency. Active voice uses active verbs. That's verbs that do not include forms of the verb to be. And the best way I have found to understand how to use the active voice is actually to find a style guide that you like and that helps you understand this concept. So this is really about taking the time and energy it might take to pick up one of these. This is a style guide I like. It's for Writers by Diana Hacker. It's, what? The first thing on this huge guide with all these pages, the first is about 10 pages on how to use the active voice. So it's not hard to find instruction. And I just highly recommend that you go ahead and just do it for yourself, do it for your colleagues, see where you notice there's passive language. As you learn more about it, you'll actually understand it more. It's such a good tool. So I'm really gonna push that one. And as I edit other people's work, I'm always saying, hey, here's a way to use the active voice. So even if you can't recognize it in your own writing, you might be able to see it in other people's writing, and then you can help, sort of learn it by editing. So I highly recommend it, and using a style guide is a thing some of us still do, and there are style guides online, so you don't have to buy one, but if you go to a thrift store and you pick up a couple and see which one works for you. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So I just want to make sure that we all understand why we're here. Again, just to reiterate that we have the goals that we have for using people first language or language equity are pretty lofty, right? We want to understand and apply the authentic language of the individuals and communities with whom we work. We want to use language that reflects people's choice and style and how they talk about themselves, rather than categorization and labels that are used to oppress groups of people. We want to acknowledge that language impacts people. Language can make people feel like they belong, but it can also be used to discriminate and advance divisiveness and inequality. And that we as individuals and organizations have the opportunity to advance equity and inclusion in language with these tools that we've been talking about. So the next page is actually the last page of this webinar that's really content focused, and this is really about that resource page that I sent out previous to the webinar. And there are a lot of resources on that page, and I've looked at them all. I think they're all really good. And so I'm just gonna tell you what's there. Power of Asset Framing, a conversation with Travian Shorters. So that gives you a link to some videos where he's actually talking about it from his own words, and he's a really compelling speaker. So I recommend, it's not very long, I recommend listening to him talk about it himself. The second is the Some of Us Progressive Style Guide. This is probably the resource I use the most for this webinar. And Some of Us is a global movement. They are writers, they're activists. And two folks came together and put this progressive style guide together. They go through all of the different ways that we choose identities and talk about them in the sort of how to change the language to respect the folks who use these categorizations. The Equity Language Guide from Washington State Governor's Interagency Council on Health Disparities is simply it's a pretty simple guide about equity language, but what I found really interesting about it is that it's a statewide governor's council, and they're talking about health disparities, and it's from the state of Washington. So they had the bright idea to put it out there, and I love that it's statewide. I love that it's sort of a governmental agency trying to figure out how to use this language in a way that's very professional. The next one, RADCOM's resource directory. If any of you are in the communications field, RADCOM's is pretty well known, but the resource directory is this really long list of links to help you based on exactly who you're talking about, what you're doing. And again, it's a community of activists, organizers, change makers, people who are really looking to describe how we use social justice in our organizations. And the last one is an article from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. In fact, I have this the magazine, the physical magazine. This is what it looks like. They did in July, they did a whole edition about taking a stand against what we might be doing to our democracy. And fighting the free speech battle for nonprofits is one of the articles. Just gives a really nice example of a present day organization who's really fighting against non-equitable language, basically. So those are the resources I gave you. And again, you can always contact me. The next slide is just simply our ending slide that says my information, but it's also, you've also got my information if you want to